Welcome to the Ghastly Journal. Tonight, we delve into corners of forgotten places, shadowy and obscure. On no maps do these places exist. Their names are whispered only in hushed tones by those who know better than to speak too loudly. This is the story of the Shallows. Established in 1887 was the small coastal settlement that would later be known as the Shallows. Nestled in a hidden cove along the northeastern seaboard, it was a place that seemed designed by nature itself to remain hidden, sheltered by towering granite cliffs on three sides and facing the temperamental Atlantic on the fourth. A charismatic but enigmatic figure named Jeremiah Blackwood, a former sea captain with peculiar ideas about governance and community, led the original settlers, 19 families in total. What drew these families to such a remote location? Historical records are scarce, but letters recovered decades later suggest they were seeking isolation not merely for religious freedom, as was common in those days, but for something darker, something they called the practice. What this practice entailed remained unspecified in the surviving documents, referred to only in veiled language and cryptic terms. Unusual was the geography of the Shallows. Despite its name, the waters surrounding the cove were anything but shallow. Just a few yards from shore, they plunged to extraordinary depths, creating what sailors call a black drop, where the seafloor suddenly disappears into an abyss. Unnaturally cold were these waters, even in summer months, claimed local fishermen, and strangely devoid of the usual marine life that should have thrived there. For the first decade, the settlement appeared to function like many other isolated communities of the era. Modest wooden homes they built, a small chapel, a schoolhouse, and a meeting hall. They fished the deep waters beyond the cove and cultivated what little arable land was available on the clifftops. Occasionally, trading vessels would stop, bringing supplies and taking away the settlement's only export, unusual black pearls harvested from the depths of the cove, pearls that were said to have an almost hypnotic quality when viewed in certain light. But even in these early years, troubling signs were present. The ship captains who traded with the Shallows reported that the community never seemed to diminish in size despite no new settlers arriving. Yet, they never saw any children. The residents were described as unnaturally pale with eyes that reflected no light, according to one captain's log. Most disturbing was the fact that, despite the passing of years, none of the original settlers appeared to age. In the winter of 1897, when a severe storm forced a mail ship to seek refuge in the cove, came the first concrete evidence of something truly wrong. The captain, a man named William Hayes, recorded in his journal that he was struck by the complete absence of a cemetery in the settlement. When he inquired about where they buried their dead, the residents reportedly fell silent before Jeremiah Blackwood explained that they returned their departed to the depths which had sustained them. Permitted to stay only a single night was Hayes. During his uneasy rest, he claimed to have been awakened by chanting coming from the shore. Peering through his cabin window, he observed the entire community gathered at the water's edge, lowering something large and wrapped in seaweed into the black waters. Hayes wrote that as the bundle sank, he could have sworn he saw it twitch. At first light, the mail ship departed, and Captain Hayes never returned to the Shallows. His account might have been dismissed as the imagination of a superstitious sailor, except for what happened 5 years later, in 1902. A census taker named James Elliott was dispatched to record the population of all coastal settlements in the region. When he failed to return from the Shallows, authorities sent a small party to investigate. They found the settlement apparently abandoned, doors left open, meals half-eaten on tables, fishing nets still laid out to dry. Of Elliott, they found only his census book, which contained a peculiar entry. Under population, he had written, 19 families, always 19 families. No births recorded, no deaths recorded. How is this possible after 15 years? These findings the investigation party reported. But before any further action could be taken, a powerful nor'easter struck the coast. When conditions allowed for a return expedition, they found the cove empty. No buildings, no docks, no sign that anyone had ever lived there. Officials concluded that the storm had simply washed away the abandoned settlement, and the matter was closed. The Shallows might have remained nothing more than a curious footnote in history were it not for what happened in 1947, when a fishing trawler named the Mary Ann encountered engine trouble and drifted into an unfamiliar cove sheltered by high cliffs. The 5-man crew was surprised to discover a small settlement that appeared on none of their charts. More surprising still was the reception they received. The residents, described as unnaturally pale with eyes like black glass, welcomed them with an enthusiasm that the captain, Raymond Foster, found unsettling. The community called their home the Shallows and explained they had little contact with the outside world by choice. They invited the crew to dine with them while repairs were made to the Mary Ann. During this meal, Foster noticed several disturbing details. The residents asked numerous questions about the outside world but provided vague answers about themselves. They all wore clothing that seemed decades out of date. And most alarmingly, he recognized names mentioned in conversation, Jeremiah Blackwood and others that matched those from the settlement established 60 years earlier. Lodging for the night was offered to the crew, but Captain Foster, increasingly uneasy, insisted they sleep aboard their vessel. During the night, 2 crew members disappeared. When Foster and the remaining men confronted the residents, they were told the missing men had simply chosen to join the community and were preparing for the depths. Foster and his 2 remaining crew members fled to their vessel and managed to restart the engine. As they pulled away from the shore, Foster claimed he saw dozens of pale figures emerging from the water, climbing the beach toward the settlement. He would later report that these figures moved in a jerking, unnatural manner, as if they were puppets being pulled by unseen strings. When authorities investigated Foster's claims, they found no settlement, no cove matching his description, and most disturbing of all, no record of a fishing vessel named Mary Ann ever being registered. Foster and his 2 crewmen were briefly held in an asylum before being released. All 3 would die under mysterious circumstances within a year, drownings in bodies of water that should have been too shallow to pose any danger. The story of the Shallows might have ended there, written off as the delusion of disturbed men, had it not been for a series of strange discoveries beginning in the 1970s. Unusual artifacts began to be recovered from the ocean floor miles offshore from where the Shallows was allegedly located by deep-sea fishing vessels. Household items like cooking utensils, children's toys, and furniture, all preserved by the cold, deep waters, and all dating from different time periods, spanning from the 1880s to the 1960s. More disturbing were the occasional human remains, partial skeletons with peculiar modifications. The bones were described as having an unusual density and being partially calcified with coral-like growths. Most unsettling were the skulls, which showed evidence of surgical alterations to the eye sockets and jaw, creating what one marine biologist described as adaptations more suited to deep-water creatures than human beings. The attention of Dr. Eleanor Marsh, a marine archaeologist specializing in lost coastal settlements, was attracted by these discoveries. In 1982, she assembled a research vessel and team to conduct a systematic survey of the area where the Shallows was believed to have existed. What they found defied conventional explanation. Using sonar mapping, Marsh's team discovered an underwater geological formation that appeared to be the remnants of a settlement, foundations of buildings arranged in a pattern consistent with a small village. But this village sat on a massive underwater shelf nearly 300 feet below the surface. More baffling was that this shelf showed evidence of having once been above water, but geological records indicated it would have submerged gradually over thousands of years, not within the span of human settlement. Another chilling discovery was made by the expedition. Their sonar detected a massive network of caves extending from the submerged settlement deep into the underwater cliff face. When they sent down remotely operated vehicles to investigate, the cameras captured glimpses of what appeared to be artificial structures within these caves, structures that suggested habitation. Most disturbing of all was what one ROV recorded before losing connection, a pale humanoid figure swimming with unnatural speed and precision through the darkness, its eyes reflecting the ROV's lights, like those of a deep-sea creature. When the ROV was recovered days later, its metal hull showed evidence of tool marks. Something had attempted to dismantle it using implements requiring significant dexterity and intelligence. Dr. Marsh's findings were largely dismissed by the scientific community, who suggested the underwater structures were merely natural formations misinterpreted through the lens of confirmation bias. The humanoid figure was explained away as most likely a large marine mammal distorted by poor visibility and camera limitations. Undeterred, Marsh continued her research independently, collecting accounts from fishing vessels that reported strange encounters in the waters above the submerged site, unexplained equipment failures, disembodied voices heard through radio static, and pale figures briefly glimpsed at the water's surface during night operations. In 1987, exactly 1 century after the founding of the original settlement, Marsh made her final expedition to the site. Communications with her research vessel, the Thea, ceased abruptly on the 3rd day of their survey. When Coast Guard vessels reached their last known location, they found the Thea adrift and empty. No crew, no signs of struggle, no explanation for their disappearance. The ship's log contained only a final cryptic entry in Marsh's handwriting: "They're still here. They never left. The settlement didn't sink. It was taken. They're changing. God help us. They're still changing." The official investigation concluded that the Thea had likely encountered a sudden powerful storm that had washed the crew overboard. The ship itself showed no damage consistent with this theory, but no alternative explanation was ever officially acknowledged. The waters where the shallows once existed, or perhaps still exists in some form, were subsequently designated a restricted marine zone, ostensibly for environmental protection. Satellite imagery has revealed that government vessels periodically visit the area, conducting operations that remain classified to this day. What happened to the original settlers of the shallows? What became of the 19 families who followed Jeremiah Blackwood to that isolated cove? The evidence, fragmented though it is, points to a disturbing possibility, that they never left, and perhaps never died, at least not in any conventional sense. Letters recovered from the personal effects of Captain Hayes contain passages that may shed light on the community's true nature. In one, he described a conversation with a resident who explained their philosophy: "Captain Blackwood teaches that death is merely a failure of adaptation. The depths call to all of us eventually. Why fear the inevitable? Better to embrace transformation than resist it." Another piece of evidence comes from the personal journal of Dr. Marsh, recovered from her home after her disappearance. In it, she theorized, "I believe the Shallows was aware from the beginning that their land was sinking. Rather than abandon their homes, they chose adaptation, physiological adaptation, achieved through some combination of surgery, selective breeding, and perhaps something else, something we have yet to understand." The modifications observed in the recovered remains suggest they were literally transforming themselves to survive underwater. But the process appears incomplete, as if they exist now in some transitional state between human and something other. Perhaps most chilling are the reports that continue to emerge from vessels that stray too close to the restricted zone. Fishing crews speak of hearing voices in the fog, voices that call to them by name despite the speakers remaining unseen. They describe vivid dreams of an underwater settlement where pale figures with black eyes beckon from doorways. Some claim to have seen faces watching them from just beneath the water's surface, faces that appear almost human but with features subtly and unsettlingly wrong. And then there are the disappearances. Individuals who go missing from vessels in the area, with the only clue being wet footprints leading to the ship's edge, as if someone had calmly walked overboard. In several cases, these missing persons have reportedly been sighted years later by former acquaintances, typically at night along remote stretches of coastline. They are described as gaunt, pale, with eyes that reflect light like a cat's, and they speak of the community below before retreating into the water when approached. Local folklore has incorporated these accounts into a grim warning passed among seafarers: if you hear them calling from the water, turn your ship around. If you see their eyes in the depths, don't look twice. And if they know your name, you're already theirs. Government records obtained through Freedom of Information requests reveal that between 1947 and 2018, there were 27 registered incidents involving unusual marine humanoid sightings within 50 miles of where the Shallows was believed to have existed. Most reports were filed by military vessels or commercial ships, with descriptions remaining remarkably consistent over the decades: pale figures swimming at depths and speeds impossible for conventional divers, displaying apparent tool use and coordinated behavior. A partially redacted Navy document from 1996 references the shallows anomaly and outlines containment protocols, including acoustic deterrence and regular surveillance. One unredacted passage states, subjects continue to display increasing adaptation to deep water conditions while retaining manipulative capabilities and apparent cognitive functions consistent with human intelligence. Attempted communication has yielded inconsistent results, though subjects appear to respond to certain frequencies of sonar with patterns suggesting linguistic structure. In 2005, a deep-sea mining operation in the general vicinity was abruptly cancelled after preliminary surveys. The company cited unfavorable geological conditions, but internal memos leaked to environmental groups mentioned evidence of artificial structures and biological activity inconsistent with known marine species. Shortly thereafter, the entire area was designated a marine reserve, closed to commercial activities. Perhaps the most compelling evidence for the continued existence of the shallows comes from recordings made by a marine biologist named Thomas Chen in 2012. Chen had been studying deep-sea adaptation mechanisms in marine mammals when his underwater microphones captured what he initially believed to be an unknown species of whale. Analysis revealed the sounds to contain patterns consistent with human speech, but distorted and modified as if produced by vocal organs that had evolved for underwater use. When processed through specialized acoustic software, portions of these recordings became eerily intelligible. Among the few decipherable phrases was one that appeared multiple times: "The 19 families endure. The covenant with the depths remains unbroken." Chen disappeared while conducting solo research 3 months after submitting these recordings to his university. His abandoned diving equipment was recovered, but his body was never found. The university subsequently disavowed his research, suggesting the recordings had been hoaxed. The original audio files were reportedly lost in a server malfunction. What are we to make of these fragments? What happened to the shallows and its inhabitants? The pattern suggests a community that, rather than flee their sinking land, chose a different path, a gradual, generations-long transformation that allowed them to follow their homes into the depths. But this raises more questions than it answers. How could such physiological changes be achieved? Some theories point to the unusual black pearls the community harvested, suggesting they contained compounds that triggered mutations when consumed over time. Others propose that the community discovered something in the underwater caves, something ancient that offered knowledge of biological manipulation beyond 19th-century science. The reference to 19 families appearing consistently across accounts spanning more than a century suggests another disturbing possibility, that the residents found some way to extend their lifespans far beyond normal human limits. This would explain why the settlement never grew yet never diminished, why no births or deaths were recorded, and why the same names appear in accounts from different eras. But perhaps most unsettling is the question of intent. What is the purpose of the transformed community that may still exist beneath the waves? The scattered evidence points to an ongoing process. They continue to change, continue to adapt, and according to some accounts, continue to call others to join them. The recovered fragments of Jeremiah Blackwood's writings hint at a quasi-religious philosophy centered around embracing the inevitable, surrender to the depths, and transcending the limitations of terrestrial existence. Was the submergence of their settlement not an accident, but the fulfillment of some dark prophecy or plan? Reports of individuals going missing near those waters, only to be glimpsed years later transformed and attempting to lure others, suggest something more predatory. They bury everyone, yet never report deaths, because in their minds, perhaps these are not deaths but conversions, transformations, recruits to their ever-adapting community. In 2018, a submersible conducting a biological survey of the marine reserve captured brief footage of what appeared to be artificial lights deep within the underwater cliff face where Marsh had discovered the cave network decades earlier. The lights appeared to be arranged in patterns similar to street layouts or building illumination. When the submersible approached to investigate, it experienced sudden and catastrophic electrical failures, barely managing to return to the surface. One of the scientists aboard, Dr. Amelia Santos, later reported having heard voices through the hull of the submersible. Voices that spoke her name and told her she was expected below. She described experiencing intense dreams for months afterward, always of a submerged town where pale figures with elongated limbs and webbed hands beckoned to her from the windows of sunken buildings. These dreams stopped abruptly after she moved inland to take a position at a university in Colorado, thousands of miles from any ocean. In 2020, satellite imagery detected an unusual thermal anomaly at the site, a large area of water significantly colder than its surroundings, defying normal oceanographic patterns. Marine scientists were unable to explain this phenomenon, which persisted for months before abruptly disappearing. During this period, unusual marine mammal behavior was observed in the region, with multiple species appearing to deliberately avoid the area despite it being rich in their usual food sources. The last verified incident connected to the shallows occurred in early 2022, when a group of recreational divers went missing after reportedly discovering an underwater structure not marked on any charts. A search and rescue operation recovered their boat, but not the divers themselves. The only clue was a waterproof camera containing images of what appeared to be a stone archway encrusted with coral and barnacles, bearing an inscription partially legible as, "Lo where the hands form weights." 2 weeks after their disappearance, Coast Guard personnel reported receiving a radio transmission on an emergency frequency consisting only of labored breathing, followed by a voice that stated, "We have gone to the shallows. Do not follow. The 19 families welcome us. The change has begun." Attempts to trace the transmission were unsuccessful. What are we left with, then? A settlement that sank, but whose inhabitants refused to leave. A community that chose transformation over relocation. A place where deaths are never reported because perhaps death, as we understand it, no longer exists for them. And most disturbing of all, the suggestion that they continue to draw others to join them in whatever they have become. The restricted waters above where the shallows once stood, or perhaps still stands in its altered form, remain a blank spot on most maps. A place where electronic navigation systems mysteriously malfunction, where radio transmissions become garbled with sounds like distant chanting, where compasses spin uselessly, and modern technology proves unreliable. Fishermen give it a wide berth, even at the cost of bypassing rich fishing grounds. They have their own name for the area, the calling waters. And they warn their children never to heed voices that might come from the sea on foggy nights, especially if those voices know their names. Is the shallows gone, or merely transformed? Are its inhabitants monsters, or pioneers of some unthinkable evolution? Do they reach out from beneath the waves even now, seeking to draw others into their cold embrace? The fragmented evidence we have offers no definitive answers, only unsettling possibilities. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in those dark waters, in the ruins of a settlement that refused to die, among the descendants of 19 families who chose the depths over abandonment. But it is a truth that comes with a warning: those who seek too ardently to uncover the secrets of the shallows risk being claimed by them, joining the ranks of the transformed, who are buried without death, who are changed without dying, who call others to join them in the cold darkness below. As for me, I've spent years piecing together this narrative from scattered sources, trying to construct a coherent account of what happened to the shallows and what may still be happening beneath those waters. In doing so, I've noticed something unsettling. My dreams have changed. I see dark waters and pale faces. I hear voices speaking my name from the depths of my bathtub. I feel a strange pulling sensation whenever I'm near large bodies of water. Last week, I found a black pearl on my doorstep, though I live hundreds of miles from the ocean. When I hold it to the light, I can almost see something moving within its iridescent surface, something that looks like a miniature version of a submerged town where altered figures swim through flooded streets and beckon from windows. I've arranged for this account to be published regardless of what happens to me. If you're watching this and I've gone missing, don't look for me in the places where land meets sea. Don't search too deeply into the mysteries I've uncovered. And if you hear something calling your name from dark waters, remember the fate of the shallows and those who sought to understand it too well. The 19 families endure. The covenant with the depths remains unbroken. And the transformation, once begun, cannot be undone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's return to the historical record and examine what we know for certain about the settlement's early years, before speculation clouds our understanding. The founding of the shallows in 1887 coincided with a period of unusual seismic activity along the northeastern coast. Geological surveys from the time recorded minor but persistent tremors in the region where Jeremiah Blackwood chose to establish his community. This has led some researchers to suggest that the captain may have been aware that the land was unstable, that perhaps the gradual subsidence of the settlement was not just anticipated, but deliberately chosen. Blackwood's background before arriving at the shallows adds weight to this theory. Naval records indicate he had spent several years charting deep ocean trenches in the Pacific, during which his ship was reported lost with all hands after a violent storm. He reappeared 6 months later on the opposite side of the world, refusing to explain his survival or whereabouts during the interim. The only clue was a new obsession with deep-sea life forms and their adaptations to extreme pressure and darkness. The original 19 families who followed Blackwood to the shallows were not, as first assumed, random adherents to whatever philosophy he espoused. Genealogical research has revealed that all 19 family lines shared an unusual genetic marker, a rare mutation affecting lung tissue and eye structure. This mutation, while minor in its effects on land, would theoretically provide advantages for extended periods underwater, including enhanced night vision and more efficient oxygen processing. This raises the disturbing possibility that Blackwood selected his followers not for their beliefs, but for their genetic potential, the foundation for a community that could eventually adapt to underwater life. The settlement's sole export, the strange black pearls, merits closer examination as well. Chemical analysis of a sample recovered from a private collection in 1998 revealed compounds unknown to modern science, including complex proteins that appeared to interact with human DNA in laboratory tests. Researchers noted these proteins seemed to trigger cellular changes that increased pressure tolerance and modified respiration efficiency. The project was abruptly defunded, and the findings sealed under national security provisions. The layout of the original settlement, reconstructed from Hayes's descriptions and the underwater survey conducted by Dr. Marsh, suggests another layer of purpose. The buildings were arranged in concentric circles around a central structure Blackwood called the preparation chamber. This arrangement mimicked the pattern of certain deep-sea organisms that undergo metamorphosis through distinct life stages, a physical manifestation of the transformation philosophy that apparently guided the community. Census records from neighboring coastal towns contain another anomaly. Between 1887 and 1902, 27 individuals were reported missing after last being seen traveling in the direction of the shallows. None were ever found. Yet, the population of the settlement remained constant at 19 families. This suggests the community was indeed recruiting new members, but only to replace those who had either died or undergone some change that removed them from the visible population. Hayes's account of seeing residents lowering wrapped bundles into the water takes on new significance in this context. Were these burials, as he assumed, or some form of ceremonial transformation, sending fully or partially altered individuals to a new phase of existence beneath the waves? The incident in 1902, when the settlement appeared suddenly abandoned before disappearing entirely beneath the waves, coincides with geological records of a significant underwater landslide that could have accelerated the gradual subsidence Blackwood may have anticipated. But rather than a disaster that claimed the lives of the residents, what if it was the fulfillment of a plan, the final phase of a controlled descent that the community had been preparing for all along? This would explain the half-eaten meals and daily activities left in progress, not signs of sudden catastrophe, but of deliberate transition executed according to a predetermined timetable. The reappearance of a settlement calling itself the Shallows in 1947, with residents bearing the same names as those recorded 60 years earlier, suggests not just continuity, but literal survival of the original inhabitants. Captain Foster's description of pale figures emerging from the water at night indicates a community that had adapted to aquatic life but retained the ability to return to land, at least temporarily. The modifications observed in skeletal remains recovered from the seabed support this hypothesis. The altered eye sockets show evidence of development of a reflective layer similar to that found in deep-sea fish, improving vision in low-light conditions. Jaw modifications suggest adaptation for different dietary needs and possibly underwater vocalization. Most significant are the changes to the rib cage and what appears to be the development of additional respiratory structures alongside the lungs, potentially allowing for a hybrid breathing system capable of processing both air and water. These adaptations, if real, would represent an evolutionary leap impossible within normal human lifespans. This brings us to the most unsettling aspect of the shallow's mystery, the apparent longevity of its inhabitants. The consistent reference to 19 families across more than a century suggests a population that either ages extremely slowly or not at all. Dr. Marsh's notes propose a connection between this apparent immortality and the transformative process itself. The cellular regeneration necessary for such profound physiological changes may have the side effect of continuously renewing all body tissues, effectively halting or dramatically slowing the aging process. If this is true, the residents of the shallows may exist in a state of perpetual transformation, neither fully human nor fully whatever they are becoming, neither living in the conventional sense nor dead, but suspended in an ongoing metamorphosis that has continued for generations. The question remains, what is the ultimate goal of this transformation? The scattered writings attributed to Blackwood speak of ascending to the next stage of human evolution and embracing the future that waits in the depths. He described the ocean as the cradle of all life, to which advanced life must return to be reborn. More troubling are references in later accounts to the covenant with the depths and those who dwell below the floor. These phrases appear consistently in incidents spanning decades, suggesting the shallows community believes themselves to be in service to or alliance with something else, something that perhaps already inhabited the extreme depths near their settlement. Marine biologists have noted that the area where the shallows once stood lies above an unusually deep ocean trench, one that reaches depths normally found only in the most remote parts of the ocean. Sonar mapping has detected unusual formations within this trench that some experts have suggested could be artificial structures, though most attribute these readings to equipment malfunction or natural geological formations. The restricted zone established by governmental authorities around the site extends to the ocean floor and includes provisions specifically prohibiting certain types of deep-sea scanning technology. The official reason given is protection of sensitive marine ecosystems, but internal documents refer to containment of the shallows anomaly and prevention of unauthorized contact with subsurface entities. These fragments paint a disturbing picture, a community that deliberately transformed itself to inhabit the deep ocean, potentially guided by or in service to something already dwelling in those depths, a population that exists in a state between human and something else, between life and death as conventionally understood, and most concerning, a group that continues to draw others to join them, to undergo the same transformation, to be buried without dying. The incidents involving missing persons who are later glimpsed near shorelines attempting to lure others into the water suggest the community is not content to remain isolated. They seek to grow, to convert, to transform others as they themselves were transformed. The philosophy behind this behavior remains unclear. Is it missionary zeal, a genuine belief that they have discovered a superior form of existence they wish to share? Is it predatory, a need to draw others into their condition to sustain themselves in some way? Or is it something more complex, the fulfillment of some grand design that Blackwood envisioned over a century ago, a design that perhaps originated not with him, but with whatever he encountered during those 6 months he was presumed dead? In 2015, a marine research vessel conducting a biodiversity survey in international waters, hundreds of miles from the shallows site, reported a bizarre encounter. Their remotely operated vehicle, at a depth of over 3,000 feet, captured images of what appeared to be the remnants of a small boat embedded in the seafloor sediment. Near this boat, their cameras recorded a humanoid figure moving with deliberate purpose among the rocks. The figure was described as approximately human-sized, but with elongated limbs, webbed appendages, and skin that appeared almost translucent, revealing a complex circulatory system unlike anything known to science. Most disturbing was that the figure appeared to notice the ROV and approached it directly, reaching toward the camera with a hand that, while clearly adapted for aquatic life, retained an unmistakably human structure, including what appeared to be a gold wedding band on one digit. Before contact could occur, the ROV suffered a catastrophic power failure and was lost. When the research vessel attempted to report the incident, they found their communication systems inexplicably disabled. By the time they returned to port 3 days later, several crew members had begun experiencing vivid dreams of underwater structures and voices calling them by name. 2 researchers from this expedition subsequently resigned their positions and moved to coastal communities, where they were later reported missing after witnesses saw them walking into the sea during night hours. Neither body was recovered. This incident, occurring so far from the original Shallows location, suggests the community's range may be expanding, that what began as a localized phenomenon centered around a single submerged settlement may now extend across vast areas of the ocean. If the transformed inhabitants can survive the crushing pressures of the deep sea, they would have access to a domain that remains largely inaccessible to conventional human exploration. The underwater tunnel networks detected by Dr. Marsh's expedition could potentially extend much further than initially believed, creating a subsurface transportation system allowing the community to emerge almost anywhere ocean meets land. This would explain the seemingly disconnected reports of shallows-like encounters along coastlines thousands of miles apart. Recent advances in genetic engineering and biotechnology raise another disturbing possibility. What if Blackwood somehow possessed knowledge far ahead of his time? The modifications observed and recovered remains display a sophistication that 19th-century science could not possibly have achieved. Yet, the process appears to have begun during that era. Some researchers have proposed that the unusual geology of the Shallows site may be the key. The deep trench near the settlement could have exposed the community to organisms or compounds from extreme depths, biological materials with properties science is only beginning to understand. Blackwood's writings refer to the gifts of the deep and communion with the ancient ones who dwell where light has never reached. Whatever the mechanism, the evidence suggests the transformation of the Shallows' inhabitants involves more than simple physical adaptation. Reports consistently describe behavioral changes in those who have been taken or converted, a singular focus on drawing others to join them, an apparent hive-mind coordination, and most unnervingly, the ability to somehow know personal details about those they target, including their names and aspects of their lives they should have no way of knowing. This suggests either some form of enhanced perception or, more unsettlingly, a collective consciousness that can somehow access information about potential recruits. Several accounts describe the voices from the water revealing secrets that no one else could possibly know, creating an almost hypnotic attraction that pulls victims toward the depths. Dr. Santos, the researcher who experienced dreams of the submerged town after her submersible expedition, reported that in her nightmares, the pale figures would tell her things about her childhood that she had never shared with anyone. "They knew about the treehouse my father built when I was 6, she wrote. "They knew about the name of my first pet. They knew things that weren't in any record anywhere." This aspect of the phenomenon has led some investigators to propose that the transformation process affects not just the physical body, but consciousness itself, that the inhabitants of the Shallows have developed something beyond normal human perception, a form of awareness that transcends conventional sensory limitations. The consistent reports of electronic and navigational equipment malfunctioning near the site add another layer to this theory. What if the transformed community has developed abilities that allow them to affect electromagnetic fields, to disrupt technology that might detect or document their existence? Government involvement in containing and studying the Shallows phenomenon appears more extensive than publicly acknowledged. Beyond the restricted marine zone and surveillance activities, classified documents reference biological containment protocols and cognitive defense measures deployed in coastal communities near the site. These measures reportedly include subtle architectural modifications to shoreline structures, incorporating elements that supposedly disrupt the attraction effect documented in Shallows encounters. Public water supplies in these areas are monitored for unusual compounds that some researchers believe may be used by the transformed community to prepare potential recruits for conversion. Most concerning are references to sleeper agents, individuals who may have been partially influenced by contact with the Shallows phenomenon but show no outward signs of transformation. These individuals reportedly live normal lives in coastal communities but may serve as observers or facilitators for the subsurface community, identifying potential recruits and subtly influencing them toward eventual conversion. The theory of sleeper agents gained credibility following incidents in 2017, when 3 previously unremarkable residents of different seaside towns independently attempted to disable coastal monitoring equipment on the same night. When apprehended, all 3 had no memory of their actions and showed unusual physiological markers, including elevated tolerance for low-oxygen environments and significantly reduced body temperature. All had reported vivid dreams of underwater structures in the weeks preceding the incidents. The true extent of the Shallows community, how many they number, how far their influence reaches, what their ultimate intentions might be, remains unknown. The scattered evidence suggests a population that continues to grow through conversion rather than reproduction, that extends its reach through both physical presence and some form of psychological influence, and that operates according to a philosophy or purpose largely incomprehensible to surface dwellers. What is clear is that they do not consider death as we understand it to be an end, but rather a transformation, a passage from one state of being to another. They bury their converts in the depths, but these are not conventional burials. They are submersions, metamorphoses, the beginning of a process that turns human into something else while preserving some essential aspect of the original consciousness. They never report deaths because, in their understanding, no one truly dies. They are simply changed, adapted, evolved to join what one recovered fragment describes as the greater community that waits in darkness, that has always waited, that will embrace all who return to the first home of all life. Is this merely the philosophy of a cult that has found some way to physically adapt to underwater existence? Or have they genuinely discovered something profound about human potential for transformation? The evidence does not provide definitive answers, only the unsettling suggestion that beneath the waves, in darkness and cold that should be hostile to human life, something that was once human continues to thrive and change and call to those above. The 19 families who followed Jeremiah Blackwood to a remote cove in 1887 may still exist in some form, transformed beyond recognition but retaining enough of their original nature to remember names, to use tools, to plan and coordinate actions across vast distances. They have created a community that spans the boundary between land and sea, between human and other, between life and something that transcends conventional mortality. They bury everyone but never report deaths. Because in the depths of the shallows, death, as we understand it, may no longer exist. Only transformation. Only change. Only the endless adaptation to an environment where human beings were never meant to dwell, but where these former humans have somehow found a way to persist. The waters above where the shallows once stood remain restricted, monitored, a place where vessels do not linger and from which divers return changed or do not return at all. Whatever dwells there now, whatever the 19 families have become, continues its patient, generations-long metamorphosis, reaching occasionally toward the surface, calling new converts to join them in the cold embrace of the depths. So, if you find yourself on dark waters and hear voices calling your name, if you see pale figures just beneath the surface with eyes that reflect no light, if you dream of sunken streets where altered forms beckon from doorways, remember the fate of the shallows. Remember those who sought transformation instead of escape, who chose the depths instead of the shore, who buried their dead without reporting deaths because in their understanding, death itself had been transcended. The covenant with the depths remains unbroken. The 19 families endure. And somewhere in the darkness below, they wait. Not dead, not alive, as we understand these states. But transformed. Always transformed. Always changing. Always calling others to join them in whatever they have become. I mentioned earlier finding a black pearl on my doorstep. Since then, I've noticed other signs. Wetness around my home despite no rain. The smell of salt water in rooms that should be dry. The sensation of being watched whenever I bathe. Yesterday, I found seaweed tangled in my bedsheets, though I live miles from the coast. The dreams have intensified. I see the structures beneath the waves more clearly now. I recognize faces, some from photographs I've studied during my research, others somehow familiar though I've never seen them before. They speak to me without words, showing me the changes they've undergone, the adaptations that allow them to thrive in the darkness. They show me what I could become if I joined them. I've taken precautions. I've shared my research with colleagues who will publish it if I disappear. I've installed cameras and monitoring equipment throughout my home. I've even begun sleeping in a room without water access, no pipes, no fixtures, nothing that could serve as a conduit from their world to mine. But I fear these measures may be insufficient. The black pearl sits on my desk as I record this. And sometimes, in certain light, I swear I can see it pulse like a heart. When I touch it, my fingers come away damp with something that isn't quite water, something that leaves my skin feeling different, more sensitive, with a slight bluish tint that fades after a few hours. If you're watching this and I've joined the ranks of those who sought too deeply into the mystery of the shallows, do not attempt to find me. Do not continue this research. And above all, do not venture near those restricted waters where 19 families began a transformation that continues to this day. The depths call eventually to all of us. The only choice is whether we answer. This has been the Ghastly Journal. Remember, some mysteries are better left in darkness, some histories better left unexamined, and some shallows conceal depths beyond imagining. They buried everyone, but never reported deaths. And somewhere beneath the waves, they wait still.